10 months! That's how long the average tech worker now spends looking for a job. The longest of any industry in the country. Most of us don't have 10 months of savings laying around. Getting laid off would be devastating. And with the mass tech layoffs continuing, you know your job is not safe. So here's exactly what I'd do if I got laid off today, to make sure I can land a job as soon as possible instead of being stranded jobless for months. Now, the first thing I would do is not panic, not start immediately updating my resume or reaching out to people on LinkedIn, or immediately start applying for jobs and grinding lead code. The first thing I would do is take a step back and brutally analyze the situation. One of the first things I would analyze is my runway, meaning how many months I can support myself and my dependents with my current savings. Because this would tell me if I can hold out a little bit for the right role, or if I need to find a role right away even though it's not the most ideal. The second thing I would do is analyze the current job market. I would look at the hard numbers. Which types of jobs are declining in demand, and how do my current skills map to the roles that have the highest demand? And then I would use that information to pick a target honestly. For example, if I was strapped for cash and my current specialization was still in demand, then I would look to get a role in the same field I have experience in as soon as possible. On the other hand, if I had a lot of runway and I knew my current specialization was decreasing in demand, then I would take some time to skill up in a new area. And with tools like Gemini Deep Search, getting this information is now easier than ever. As a side note, the other thing I would do is try to remember everything that I've accomplished at my previous workplace and note that down while it's fresh in my memory so I can use it on my resume when applying to roles. I remember at one point I was working for a startup and I found out that we were going to run out of money quickly. And in that moment, I knew I had to find a role as soon as possible because I was barely out of school and didn't have any savings. So what I did is take my current skill set, which at the time was front-end development, and started applying to front-end roles in my local area through websites and also local networking events, which ended up landing me a job relatively quickly. The second thing I would do is use the blue ocean strategy. The last thing you would want to do is be a generic engineer in a tough job market. A red ocean is when you have a bunch of sharks competing for the same small pile of resources. A blue ocean is where you have few competitors. And the way you get there is through specialization. I remember working with a student who had over a decade of professional development experience. And when you have that much experience, it's very likely that you've worked on many different things. Maybe you've done some front end, maybe you've done some back end, maybe some systems programming, maybe some mobile dev. And it's very tempting to put all that experience on your resume. But in this case, the student was specifically looking for embedded Rust roles. And he was struggling to get interviews despite having all this development experience. And if you think about it, if you were a hiring manager and you saw a resume with 10 years of experience in a bunch of different domains, and you compared that with another candidate who had only embedded experience, which one would be more appealing? It's probably going to be the developer who specializes in embedded software, even if he only has 5 years of experience. So what we did with this student is took his experience and reframed anything that was related to embedded to be a lot closer aligned to embedded and removed anything that was unrelated. And with that change, he was able to get interviews and finally land an embedded Rust role. And the great thing about today is you can use AI to tailor your resume based on the position you're applying for, which you should be doing on top of targeting a niche that has high demand. For me personally, I would probably target either developer tools or backend/infrastructure software that has to do with data and AI. The third thing I would do is take massive action. Some people think that 30 or 40 job applications is a lot. It's not. Let's say your goal is to get 2 or 3 job offers. We can reverse engineer how much action you would need to take if we just look at the job search process like a funnel. For example, let's say 10% of your applications get a response from a recruiter. And let's say 50% of the conversations you have with recruiters turn into technical interviews. And 25% of interviews turn into job offers. That means if you want 2 offers, you would need to apply to 160 companies. And these are very optimistic conversion numbers, so you'll likely need to do a lot more. Personally, I would start applying to hundreds of companies, if nothing else, just to have more opportunities to practice interviewing. Now, I know this is definitely not fun and can be really tedious, which is why inside the Rust Live Accelerator, we have a dedicated team that applies to companies for students that we work with. But at the end of the day, this is just something you have to grind out. The fourth thing I would do is utilize different channels of outreach. One way to apply to companies is through job boards or LinkedIn or the company website. But there are also other high-leverage ways to get a job. One of my favorites is in-person events. I remember when I was in school, I used to go to a bunch of meetups, hackathons, and other events where I would meet companies and other developers. I even had a little business card with me that I would hand out to people. And the way I actually got my first job while I was still in college is through these networking events. I had somebody reach out to me months after we met because they started a new company. And because we already met, the interview process was a lot easier and I was able to get a role at that company. There is something special and unique about building those in-person connections that does help you land roles. In fact, this is so effective that I remember one of my friends used to camp outside of the Uber offices and randomly strike up conversations with engineers that were walking out to try to get interview opportunities. And because a lot of engineers are not willing to do this in-person social work, I actually think it's really advantageous. And it's something I would personally do a lot if I was looking for a role right now. And if you want help landing a brand new Rust role, check out our Rust Live Accelerator. It's our tailored mentorship program where we help developers go beyond YouTube videos, build production-grade Rust systems, and land their first Rust job. You can join the waitlist for our next cohort by heading over to letsgetrusty.com/join, or by clicking the link in the pinned comment below. When you join the waitlist, we'll also send you our Rust developer roadmap as a small gift. So tap the link, join the waitlist, and I'll talk to you very soon.